A calculus professor thought he could expose a student's ignorance in front of the entire class, mocking him with the hardest question on the board. The room fell silent, waiting for the embarrassment. But what he didn't know was that the young black student wasn't ordinary. He was a math genius. Watch how the tables turn in this unforgettable story. Drop your thoughts in the comments, like, and subscribe for more stories that matter. He was just another student in the lecture hall, or at least, that's how it looked. But from the moment he sat down, something felt different. He wasn't there to disrupt. He wasn't there to cause trouble. He was there for one thing: to learn. Yet, before he could even open his notebook, the professor's eyes locked on him with a stare that carried something heavier than disapproval. It was the kind of stare that didn't just judge your work, it judged your worth. And in a room full of students, only one young man was made to feel like he didn't belong. The questions that followed weren't ordinary. They were weapons. Calculus problems hurled like daggers, designed not to test knowledge, but to humiliate. Every wrong answer brought smirks. Every pause fueled whispers. The air grew heavy, the room colder. But what no one realized, what the professor himself couldn't imagine, was that the very student he tried to humiliate was no ordinary student. He was a math genius, one who was about to turn this humiliation into the moment that changed everything. What happens when brilliance collides with prejudice? And how far can dignity be pushed before it rises? Aaron Mitchell wasn't a name anyone knew on campus. At least, not yet. He was quiet, reserved, the type of student who carried himself with calm determination. Raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who always told him education was his greatest weapon, Aaron had grown up knowing the value of discipline. While other students went out partying, Aaron spent his nights solving problems that others avoided. Mathematics wasn't just a subject to him, it was a language, one he spoke fluently, almost instinctively. But genius doesn't come wrapped in the skin society expects. On his first day in Professor Richard Hall's calculus class, Aaron walked in wearing his usual clean sneakers, a hoodie, and jeans. Nothing flashy, nothing extraordinary. Yet the room seemed to shift when he entered, as if invisible walls were already being built around him. He sat down, pulled out his notebook, ready to do what he loved most. But across the room, Professor Hall's eyes narrowed. To him, Aaron wasn't a bright young student. He was an intruder in a world that the professor had long guarded as his own. Aaron didn't know it yet, but he had already been chosen, not as a student to teach, but as a target to break. And with every lesson, every class, the tension would rise, pulling Aaron deeper into a storm he hadn't asked for. It started subtly, questions aimed directly at Aaron. Always harder, always sharper. While other students were given time to think, Aaron was demanded to answer instantly. "If you really belong here," the professor would say, his tone dripping with doubt, "then prove it." The words weren't just challenges, they were traps. And every time Aaron hesitated, the professor smiled. The class followed his lead. Some students laughed quietly, and others avoided looking at Aaron altogether. The humiliation wasn't in the mistakes. It was in the way the mistakes were weaponized. Soon, the whispers began. "He's not cut out for this. Why is he even here?" Each comment chipped away, carving out a space where Aaron was meant to feel small, isolated, powerless. Yet deep inside, something stronger than shame began to grow. Each insult burned, but the fire it left behind fueled him. He started spending longer hours in the library, reworking problems until they became second nature. Every question he was thrown in class, he practiced 10 more at home. But the harder he worked, the harder the professor pushed back. One day, Richard Hall pulled out a problem so complex, even the brightest students in the room froze, and he called Aaron's name. The silence was suffocating. Dozens of eyes turned toward him, waiting for him to crumble. Aaron's hand trembled as he gripped the chalk. For a moment, he felt the weight of every sneer, every doubt pressing down on him. But then, something clicked. He began to write. Numbers, symbols, equations flowed from him like music. The board filled, line after line, until the problem that seemed impossible was reduced to a clean, undeniable solution. He stepped back. The room was silent. The professor's face froze, not in triumph, but in shock. For the first time, the humiliation had shifted. The very student he tried to break had just exposed his prejudice for all to see. But the story didn't end there. Because one victory in a classroom doesn't erase the system that allowed this moment to happen. And Aaron knew this was only the beginning. The breaking point came weeks later during a midterm review session. The professor, emboldened by his authority, decided to make Aaron his example once more. In front of the packed lecture hall, he announced a challenge. Whoever could solve the unbreakable equation on the board would earn full marks for participation. He didn't look around the room. He looked directly at Aaron, daring him to fail. The equation sprawled across the chalkboard like a wall, dense with symbols, intimidating in its complexity. Students whispered, some shaking their heads. "No one can do that," they muttered. But Aaron stood up. He walked to the front, heart pounding, hands steady. With every step, the memory of every insult echoed in his mind. He picked up the chalk. Time seemed to slow. He began writing, methodical, precise, confident. The board filled, the impossible unraveling under his touch. The whispers grew, then fell silent. Minutes passed, but to Aaron, it felt like seconds. Finally, with one last stroke, he underlined the solution. Perfect, complete, undeniable. The room erupted, not in laughter, but in stunned silence, and then scattered applause. The very classmates who had once looked away were now seeing him for the first time. Professor Hall's face turned pale, his authority shattered in front of the very students he sought to impress. Aaron didn't gloat, didn't smile. He put down the chalk, turned, and walked back to his seat. In that moment, the power dynamic had shifted forever. The boy the professor tried to humiliate had become a genius no one could ignore. But beneath the triumph, one question lingered. Why did it take humiliation for his brilliance to be recognized? When Aaron walked back to his seat that day, his face burned, his chest tight with humiliation. But deep inside, a different fire had been lit. He didn't crumble. He didn't let the professor's words define him. Instead, he buried himself in the very subject the man said he would never master. Every late night, every page of notes, every problem solved became fuel. Not just to prove the professor wrong, but to prove to himself that brilliance had no color. Weeks later, when final results were posted, the truth spoke louder than any insult. Aaron had not only passed, he had achieved the highest score in the entire class. Whispers spread through the corridors. Students who had once looked away now glancing at him with something close. But even that victory carried a bittersweet edge. Because the problem was never his ability. It was the system that allowed someone like his professor to wield prejudice as power, unchecked and unchallenged. That's the cruel reality of racism. It's not always in burning crosses or shouted slurs. Sometimes it's in the quiet humiliation, the subtle dismissal, the moment designed to make someone feel small and out of place. For Aaron, the classroom had become a battlefield, and though he walked away with triumph, the scars of that moment would remain. What happened to Aaron wasn't just one bad day, it was a reflection of countless stories across campuses, workplaces, and communities. Brilliant minds silenced before they ever had the chance to shine. Dreams chipped away by a system that still questions worth based on the color of skin. How many futures have been stolen before they even began? Aaron's victory was personal, but his impact was larger. He went on to mentor other students, to show them that no matter the barriers, their voices and their talents mattered. His story became more than resilience. It became resistance. Proof that dignity cannot be erased by prejudice, that excellence is the loudest form of defiance. And yet, as we reflect on his journey, a question remains. Why should anyone have to fight this hard just to be seen for who they already are? How many more students like Aaron are sitting in classrooms right now, doubting themselves because someone told them they didn't belong? This is not just Aaron's story. It is a story of millions, a story that continues in lecture halls, in boardrooms, in neighborhoods across the world. The question is, how many more times must it be told before change finally comes? If this story moved you, don't just let it pass. Please share it. Talk about it. Be part of the conversation that demands dignity for everyone. Because racism doesn't end when we stay silent. It ends when we